Hello and welcome to my channel. All right, so I thought that it would be really fun today if we kind of went through my top 10 books of the 21st century. I'm sure lots of you have been following along with the New York Times as they reveal their top 10 or top 100, which they got by asking a ton of people what their top 10 books were. And one of the things the website does is it lets you create your own top 10 list. So I made mine and I would like to talk through it right now. So I thought that the New York Times list was pretty good, but I also thought it was definitely a New York Times list, by which I mean that anything that's not a literary fiction or very, very serious work of nonfiction tends to be excluded from those lists. I think even if you ask people for their list, they're going to go, well, this list is for the New York Times, so this is different from the list that I might give to a different publication. So although I did add about 16 books to my want to read list off of that list, my list is a little bit different. My list is going to have sci-fi and fantasy. It's going to have some Gothic stories. It's also going to have some nonfiction. It's going to have a wide range, I think, of different things, but some stuff that I feel like is really deserving of being included in the top books of the 21st century so far. So let's go ahead and get started with my first book. My first pick, and these are not in any order because narrowing it down to 10 was hard enough, okay? I cannot narrow it down to 10 and then also number those. Not happening. So my first pick is going to be Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So this is my favorite dystopian novel, I would say, of all time. Maybe. I also really love The Handmaid's Tale, so that one's up there too, but that one's not from the 21st century, so I couldn't put it in here. So Station 11 is the story of a pandemic and what happens after this pandemic that has decimated the human population. And we have parts of the book that take place before the pandemic, and we have parts that take place after. We are following a band of traveling musicians and actors who call themselves the Traveling Symphony. And they travel this ruined countryside in order to try to keep art and the humanities alive, even in this world where so much has been destroyed. And that's where the book really gets me. A lot of apocalyptic books are very grim and very dark, and there's not a lot of hope and not a lot of continuation of so many of the things that help to make our culture unique and help to make life worth living, such as the arts. And this book really just does a fantastic job of it. There's other stuff, there's a plot, there's other stuff going on, but for me, the thing that makes this book great is that it explores the idea that humanity is something more than just the people that make it up. So this is my first pick. So this book was actually on the New York Times list. It's actually at number 93, and it is well deserved. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I don't know what else to say to convince you that you should read it. It does have connections to her other two books that follow it, but it is not necessary that you read them in order or that you read all three of them at all. It is not a series. So highly recommended. So my second book is going to be nonfiction, and that book is going to be Evicted by Matthew Desmond. Matthew Desmond is a sociologist, and he actually went, I don't want to say undercover, he wasn't undercover, these people knew who he was, but he actually immersed himself in the world of people who are housing insecure, who have a lot of evictions on their record, who are sometimes homeless, who don't have a permanent address. And he made friends with them, and he followed them over a very long period of time to see what the cycle is like, to see what it is that keeps people from rising out of this hole that they get into with evictions and with housing insecurity. This is one of the most moving books that I have ever read. You will care about these people, and you will see them make decisions that they should not make, and you cannot stop them, and it's real. And it will just absolutely break your heart. I listened to this on audiobook, and I think I cried every morning on my way to work while I was listening to it. It is such a moving work. And it's something that I feel like if you want to change someone's mind about what happens to people, why people are homeless, why people end up in these situations. Presenting them with the words of real people by having this study where you make these people seem real, it means a lot more than just having facts and figures and numbers. I think that's what's so wonderful about this book. Yes, it's about the housing crisis. It's about the lack of affordable housing in this country and how that came to be and how it affects people. But it's mostly the story of people and families and people who deserve something better, because we all deserve a safe place to live. So that's my next pick. All right, so my next book was not on the New York Times list, but I feel like it should have been. And that is Babel by RF Kuang. So Babel, to me, is not a perfect book, right? This is not a book that I look at and I say it could not have been better. It's absolutely 100% perfect the way it is. I see the criticisms that people have of it and I understand them, and some of them are true. But to me, the accomplishment of this book is so great that I don't care about those things. This is the story of Robin. Robin is a Chinese boy who is taken from his home after his entire family has perished by a mysterious Englishman. He's taken to England, and eventually he finds himself at school at Oxford in the Royal Translation Academy. In this academy, people learn how to basically do the magic of this world. And the magic in this world involves translation. It involves linguistics. It involves the way that a word means one thing in one language and something else in another. And by using these translations and writing them and etching them onto these metal bars, that's how we have the magic in this world. So Robin and his friends that he meets are kind of thrown into this system, this colonial system, where many of them are from other places, and they're very valuable as translators because they speak a different language natively instead of English. So Englishmen are actually not as good at this as many of the countries that they have colonized. And so that's that kind of tension. And there is rebellion against the system within this book, and that's one of the main plot points. I don't want to spoil it. I just think that if you are interested at all in linguistics, then you will be fascinated by the amount of research that went into this for her to be able to write this book. I love the whole thing. It is very chunky. It's very long. I was very intimidated by it when I first read it, but to me, this is one of the great fantasy novels of the 21st century so far, and one of my favorite fantasy novels in general, and I highly recommend it. My next pick is one that was on the list, and that is The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11. If you want to read one book about 9/11 and what went on around 9/11, this would be the one that I would recommend, and I would highly recommend that you listen to the audiobook. I think it would probably be a very different experience to read it, but as an audiobook, it has a 45-person cast. It feels so real. The book is made up of these real eyewitness accounts and memories of everything that went on that day. I personally was in college on that day in a college classroom, and people who were younger than me who maybe don't have that immediate memory of it, I feel like this would be the place to go to really find out what that day was like for people who were there on the inside. It's a remarkable piece of reporting. It's so moving. It's so sad. It's very hard to talk about because, of course, everyone knows the story of 9/11 and basically what happened, but really hearing these eyewitness accounts from people who were there is very different, particularly if you listen to the audiobook. It is definitely worth the amount of time that it will take to listen to it. Do not speed it up. Listen to it on regular speed. I just loved it. So that's my next pick. Okay, my next pick is going to be the only young adult novel I think that's on here, and that is All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. If you only know her because of her fantasy novels, because of the Ember and the Ashes series, I mean, those are good, but this is something very different and very special. This is the story of first generation, the children of immigrants. We have Sal and Noor are our main characters, and they are both kind of trying to hold everything together. Sal because his mother has died and his father has descended into alcoholism, and he's trying to hold the family business together. And Noor has some other things going on that I'm not going to spoil because you need to read the book. But it is just such an amazing book. It tells the story of these people who seem so real. Everyone I have recommended this book to has absolutely adored it. It will break your heart. Even if you don't think you like young adult, you will like this. I don't read a lot of young adult books. This one, I believe it won the National Book Award the year that it came out, which was well-deserved. It is not in the New York Times list. I think it should be in the New York Times list, but it is in my top 10 books of the 21st century. So definitely check this one out. Okay, so how about if now we do a short book and a science fiction book? And that is, This Is How You Lose the Time War. This book is really hard to explain to people who haven't read it. It's very short. Usually I just say, you should give it a try and read it because you will probably fall in love with it. It is the story of two spies on opposite sides of a time war. Their names are Red and Blue. They don't have other names. And we see them in alternating chapters telling this story of how they fall in love, even though they are on opposite sides of this war. The war is not explained. Time travel is not really explained. This is primarily a love story, and it is one of the most beautiful love stories that I have ever read. I think it is so romantic. I just opened the book to a random page, just a random page, and because all of the writing in this book is so beautiful. And this is one of Red's chapters, and so she's writing letters to Blue, and she writes, "But if you hunger, I swell. You have me watching birds, and though I don't know their names like you know them, I have seen small, bright singers puff before they trill. That's how I feel. I sing myself out to you, and my talons clutch the branch, and I am wrung out until your next letter gives me breath, fills me to bursting." I mean, it's so romantic. It's beautiful. If you haven't read this and you consider yourself a sci-fi fan, what are you doing? I know it's intimidating and it sounds like it's going to be confusing, and it kind of is. But I promise if you give it a little bit, if you give it 50 pages out of the 180 that it is, you will fall in love. So this is a really great one. All right, so now I'm going to go to one that I don't have here, and that is a book that I read just this year and loved so much, and that is Northwoods by Daniel Mason. There's not a lot of literary fiction on this list because I probably read a little bit less of that than I do other genres, but this book is so good. It is the story of a single piece of land and an apple orchard and a house and all of the people and animals and ghosts and bugs and all kinds of things that have lived on that over a super long period of time, from Puritan times all the way up until the future. It is amazing. Every single chapter in this book tells the story of one inhabitant or one time period of people that were on this land. There are interludes in between that might be songs, they might be poems, they might be photographs that also help to tell the story. And as you move through time, you will find there are people and plot lines that carry through. It's just so good. It's just so good. It really is telling the American story, right? It's telling the American story from this Puritan couple who run away from their repressive Puritan home in order to be together in this cabin, in this apple orchard, all the way up until the future, which I'm not going to spoil for you. To me, it was just the perfect reading experience. And going in, I was not sure. I was like, I don't understand what it means that it's telling all these different stories and that it's really a story about a house, and how is that going to be good? But it was amazing. It was so good. Also, love that cat on the cover. And as you know, if you follow my channel, every book that has a cat gets bumped up by half a star. So this book gets 5.5 stars out of 5 for me. Anyway, you should read it. It's really good. Okay then, so continuing on, I have a book that is one of my favorite books that I do not see people talking about a lot anymore. Probably because it came out a little while ago. I'm looking for the date. It came out in 2006. Oh my gosh. All right, let's try to finish this up. My camera keeps dying. So my next pick is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. So this book, I don't feel like it's a ton of hype. I think that people don't really talk about it a lot. Also, inside of this book, gorgeous. So I would consider this to be a Gothic novel, a modern Gothic novel. The little blurb says, when Margaret Lee opened the door to the past, what she confronted was her destiny. So the author, Vita Winter, has, at the end of her life, decided that she wants to tell her story, and she has invited an author named Margaret to her estate to tell her story and explain where something called the missing 13th tale is, this tale that is missing from her famous collection of short stories. And it's a crazy story, okay? It's Gothic in the best possible way, much more so than a lot of the more recent things that I think have taken inspiration from this book. It's very satisfying. I think that if you like kind of Victorian tales that are more Gothic, like Jane Eyre, if you're a fan of Wuthering Heights, all of those things, I think that this would be a book that would really appeal to you. I just don't see enough people talking about it anymore, and I had to put a Gothic book in there because Gothic literature is one of my favorite and I think most underappreciated genres of literature. So The 13th Tale, if you haven't read it, give it a try. I have two more books, and the first one is going to be another fantasy novel, and that is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. American Gods is such an accomplishment. It's the idea that if we all created these gods, what would they do when there was no longer anyone to worship them anymore? And the book is about these gods and their interactions with people and each other and all that kind of stuff. And it's fantastic if you haven't read it. It also has a sequel, Anansi Boys, which I also liked, maybe even better than the first book, to be honest. I think that it is the best of Neil Gaiman's writing and the best of his books, although I'm a big fan of all of his writing. I haven't read the short stories. Anyway, I think you should read this book if you haven't read it. It's fantastic. I know a lot of people, their favorite Neil Gaiman is Good Omens, which is the book that he wrote with Terry Pratchett, but I don't like that one probably because of the Terry Pratchett parts, to be honest. But American Gods is fantastic and epic and does not go to the places that you expect it to. So I would recommend checking that one out. And then I have one last book on my top 10 books of the 21st century, and it's going to be another fantasy. And I'm sure that if you have been to my channel before, you will not be surprised to know that it is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jiminez. This is an exercise in storytelling. This book takes place in a play that takes place in a dream, that takes place in this fairy tale. At its heart, it's the story of two men who are carrying a god to stop a war. But it's a lot more than that. It's an exercise in storytelling that is very different from anything that I've ever read. It is very ambitious, and it could have all gone horribly wrong, but it didn't. It all went exactly the way that it should have, and I highly recommend that you read this one if you haven't. It didn't win any major awards, and it's not on this list, and I think both of those things are a tragedy. If you do read it, standard disclaimer that I always give, which is that you have to give it at least 100 pages to get used to the POV changes, and that you do not listen to the audiobook. I know I recommended some audiobooks earlier in this video, and this is one that you will not like it if you try the audiobook, because you will be confused. Because in this book, every character has a little snippet of POV, even characters that don't have names that you only see for 2 seconds. They will be on there giving their perspective on what's going on as they're traveling on whatever journey that they are on. And that's great because it makes the world feel very alive. But if you're listening to the audiobook, it's very confusing because you might have 2 different lines that are for 2 different POVs and you've only got one narrator, and I would just not. I tried to do a little bit of that, and I do not recommend it, and I have seen other people say the same thing, so. But it's an amazing book, and I expect so many great things from Simon Jiminez in the future because this book I'm only halfway through the year. I read it this year. Do I think it's going to be my number 1? So far, although I guess that could change. A lot of time left in the year still to come. But if you haven't read it, definitely check it out. And there you have it. That's my top 10 books of the 21st century. I would love for you to take my example, make a video of your own and link it down below. I would love to see what your top 10 books of the 21st century are. If you don't have a channel, leave it down in the comments because I would love to find some new reads that are highly recommended. As always, thanks for watching. I am so glad that you've chosen to spend this time with me. I hope that you have a great week, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.